Think you know a lot about Les Pauls? You very well may. But my question to you is, do you know about these? Thank you, people of the interweb, so very much for joining me here on this wonderful journey through Les Paul history, or more specifically, some of the more obscure models. I have been fortunate to have a rather long career in the MI industry, and over the course of my career, I've seen a lot of really strange stuff. But I've also seen a lot of really unique guitars, and among those guitars have been some very interesting Les Pauls. This is a list of 6 Gibson Les Pauls that you might not know about. So let's get to it. So number 1, the Gibson Les Paul Classic Custom. This particular guitar was produced around 2011, I believe, 12. It was only produced for a couple of years, and essentially this was kind of designed to sit somewhere between the Les Paul Classics and the Les Paul Traditionals, but also kind of serve as a more affordable version of the very expensive and very high-end Les Paul Custom. Hence the name Classic Custom. This particular guitar came with a set of Gibson 57 Classics, the big custom headstock with the binding on it, and I believe binding all the way around the body as well. One of the more unique features of this guitar, particularly by today's standards, was the baked maple fretboard that was included, as this was not long after the infamous FBI raid on the Gibson factory when they lost all the rosewood. In lieu of said FBI raid, Gibson were trying to come up with some various different ideas, such as the baked maple, or torrefied maple as it was also referred to, fretboards. In other words, they were maple fretboards that were baked at a very high pressure temperature to darken the color a little bit closer to the actual color of rosewood. But of course, still being maple, is still a much denser wood, and tonal properties were much more similar to that of maple that we all know than it was rosewood. I admit I was not a real big fan of the baked maple fretboards. However, on this guitar, it was the absolute perfect fit. The Les Paul Classic Custom sold brand new for $18.99. So they were one of the more affordable Les Pauls on the market at that time. However, if you're looking for one today, they're a little bit harder to track down than they once were, again, because they were only made for a couple of years. And number 2, they seem to go for right about $18.99 or so on the used market today. These were a big hit with Gibson customers. I remember selling an awful lot of these at the time that they were current. Why Gibson decided to cease production on these guitars, I couldn't tell you. Number 2, the Aldo Nova Les Paul. This is definitely one of the more unique Les Pauls that I have ever run across, and I have only seen one of them. According to my research prior to shooting this video, these were very limited. I even saw a couple of forums that said there were only 12 of these ever made. I think that is probably an exaggeration. I think they probably produced a few more than that, although being that this guitar was produced in the mid-80s, roughly circa 1985, 1986, it is very possible that they did indeed limit production to well under 100, because Gibson, that was a time period in Gibson's history when they were just under new ownership, and they were trying a lot of different things, testing the waters a lot of different ways, trying to find something that would resonate with the guitar community. Now, as far as the Aldo Nova Les Paul goes, it was actually a very unique Les Paul model, because as you can see, it was kind of looked like a Les Paul custom, and did come in I've seen a variety of different finishes, primarily the ebony, the classic white, which is the one that I've seen in person, and the cherry sunburst. In the instance of the sunburst model, it had a highly figured flame maple top on it. They all seem to come stock with the Les Paul Custom Black Beauty pickup configuration. In other words, 3 humbuckers. But the feature about this particular guitar that set it apart from every other Les Paul out there was the 6-inline Explorer headstock that they put on it. Made it look a little bit strange, but it also made it look really, really unique. Especially, again, back at an era when 3x3 headstocks were not quite as popular as the Shredder style 6-inline. Number 3, the Elegant Les Paul. The Elegant Les Paul was a series of custom shop guitars that Gibson produced from the late 90s all the way up to about 2006. These are out there on the market, and by comparing to some of the stuff that I have seen come out of Gibson's custom shops since then, these don't look all that spectacular. However, they were extremely well-built guitars. Extremely well-built guitars. They had very highly figured maple tops on them, which is where the Elegant came from, as well as a few other custom shop appointments on it, such as abalone inlays. I've got my hands on a few of these, and this is like a what I would consider a player's grade custom shop Les Paul, because a lot of these have a lot of these that you get your hands on seem to have a lot of miles on them, pick scratches on the top and everything. But that said, they are still beautiful, beautiful guitars to look at and very, very well made. And they still bring a lot of money on the used market today. Number 4, Les Paul Artisan. If you're not familiar with Gibson's history, particularly throughout the 70s, back in that era, they were owned by an investment corporation that specialized primarily in building materials, of all things, called Norlin. And the era from 1968 to, I believe 1986 is what, in Gibson's history, is what is known as the Norlin era. And particularly throughout the 70s, Gibson were known to not be able to build a guitar worth a damn. The 1970s, as a rule, are regarded as a pretty dark period in the history of guitars, as Gibson were not the only ones going through tough times during that time frame. However, it has only been in recent years that Gibson have even started to test the waters with any kind of 70s reissued guitars at all, just as a side note. However, throughout this particular time period, one of the bright spots for Gibson happened to be this very, very artistic and highly crafted Les Paul custom model called the Artisan. This thing had lots of very, very intricate inlays, and it was just a beautiful piece of artwork. You see these pop up on the used market, and every time I see them pop up on the used market, they seem to go for more and more money every single time. I remember selling one back about 10 years ago that was in very, very good condition for about $3,500, and I've seen them sell for twice that since then. The amount of detail that went into crafting these guitars is absolutely insane, particularly for what technology would allow back at that time. I mean, just look at the artwork and the inlays all over the place on this thing. It's incredible. I'm not a real big fan of too many 70s guitars, but a Les Paul Artisan is one that I would love to have in my collection. Number 5, the Nighthawk. This is more of a take on or a guitar inspired by a Les Paul, more so than it is an actual Les Paul. But you can look at the body shape and clearly see where the inspiration came from. The Nighthawk guitars were a little bit more unique than the various different Les Paul models that are out there, particularly the ones that are common that we're all familiar with. The Nighthawks were a little bit smaller body, definitely lighter weight, a little bit thinner, and of course the most unique thing about them was the pickup configuration. Some models had a pair of humbuckers, some models came with a single coil in the middle, but the pickups themselves, of course the slanted humbuckers, were a serious departure from anything else that Gibson were putting out at the time. The smaller body and the lighter weight, along with the typical Gibson guitar appointments such as mahogany body, mahogany neck, set neck construction, things of that nature, made these guitars great playing guitars. These were made primarily in the 90s, and then they were discontinued, but brought back onto the market in about 2009, 2010, or somewhere in there, I believe. Back in the late 2000s, when Gibson announced that they were going to be putting the Nighthawk back into production, there was so much excitement generated at the time that Seymour Duncan also announced that they were going to be making a replacement slanted pickup specifically for that guitar, specifically for those customers who might want to replace it. Number 6, the ES Les Paul. Yes, this guitar is none other than the love child of the Gibson Les Paul and the Gibson pick your favorite electric Spanish model, be it the 335 or the 355 or the 175 or what have you. In other words, this was a semi-hollow body Les Paul, complete with the F-holes and everything. The size of the body was in fact very, very close to that of a Les Paul. I think it may have been just slightly thicker by a half inch or so, but the rest of the dimensions were, everything about it was pure Les Paul, but also, as I mentioned, with a couple of F-holes and a completely different sound. They also had very highly figured tops on them and were also relatively affordable. And one more feature that attracted a lot of players out there was the fact that they were also very lightweight. If you are intrigued by the Gibson hollow body sound, but you don't want to play that great big body and something the size of a Les Paul might be a little bit more comfortable for you, go track yourself down a Gibson ES Les Paul. That guitar right there very well may fit the bill. So, there you have it. Thank you so much for taking the time to check out this video. Last year, I did a video called 13 Great Guitars That You Might Not Know About, and you guys really, really enjoyed that video and requested a part 2, which was also produced last year. I have really enjoyed doing these videos and wanted to continue them, so I thought, let's put a different spin on it, and we can do one specifically for the Gibson Les Paul. So again, I hope that you have enjoyed it, and maybe we can do a few more of these types of videos in this series here down the road. Please consider hitting the subscribe button to this channel if you haven't already. It really, really does help out a lot. And also, don't forget to hit the bell icon right next to it. That'll make sure that you don't miss out on future content. I will post links to the guitars discussed in this video down in the description, as I can find them anyway. Also, in the description, you will be able to find various different ways that you, my wonderful viewers, can support this channel should you choose to do so. Last but not least, don't forget to leave a comment down below and let me know what is your favorite obscure Les Paul model that has come out over the years that may not have made it onto this list. I would love to hear about it. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.